Well, hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Freethought in Florida. Freethought in Florida is a production of the atheist community of Polk County. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I am Sarah Ray. I'm one of the directors. I'll be your host for Freethought in Florida today. Today's guest, we have a wonderful guest on the show today. It's Mandisa Thomas, founder and current president of Black Nonbelievers. She currently serves on the board of the American Humanist Association and American Atheists, and has previously served for Foundation Beyond Belief and Secular Coalition for America. Mandisa, I think you've almost got a bingo there, like National Secular Organization bingo. I think you've almost got one. Well, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. How are you doing in this, the darkest of all possible timelines?
I am actually doing very well. Thank you for having me. And I think I should do a secular bingo because
See?
I think I don't think there's any organization that I haven't yet engaged with, which
Right.
I'm very, very happy about.
That's good. That's
So,
good.
yes.
Oh, I'm thinking like, what wasn't on that resume? Like CFI, FFRF, Secular Student Alliance, but I know that you've done work with them.
Yes,
So
yes.
you,
I actually I was the recipient of the Secular Student Alliance's Backbone Award last year. I was FFRF's Freethought Heroine for 2019, and I am on the Speakers Bureau for CFI.
you do, you
So
have them all. Yahtzee.
yeah, that's that could totally be a trivia
Uh,
question.
I love it. Well, for the folks who are watching or listening that may not know you, I think I've heard a good part of your story. But take us down that road on the journey. What was your early exposure to religion, and how did you find your way to where you are now?
So yes, my journey isn't as typical, especially from the Black experience as one may think, even though it isn't quite uncommon either. So I'm a New York City native, born and raised, and I'm 43 years old, which means I was born in the 70s, and that was a very revolutionary time, especially in New York. So my parents were at a stage where they were still like many other Black parents were trying to identify with more of the Black identity and Black pride and such. And so I come out of that era. And part of that was that my parents, especially my mother, did not want my brothers and I being raised Christian in particular.
Mm.
And I also credit my maternal grandmother, when we celebrated holidays, there was never any prayer. There was never any reference or mention of God in any way. And so from there, I was raised with a very, very Afrocentric and Black conscious point of view, and or with a perspective on education as well. And so I also learned early on about how Christianity in particular was enforced during the enslavement of Africans in this part of the world. And I would always think about that, especially during my childhood when I would sing. I'm a classically trained singer. I would sing with my voice teacher. And when I was singing different churches, I would kind of take in what was being said, and it really confused me. And so I just thought, wow, this stuff is strange. So, that was never lost on me growing up. But over the years, I would say I was spiritual, but not religious. I remember the first time I was asked if I was atheist was when I was 14. And because I was so outspoken, I was so militant. And some of my classmates asked, was I atheist? And when I asked what that meant, I was told I didn't believe in heaven or hell.
Mhm.
And so at first I was like, wow, yeah, that sounds like me. But then, I just kind of just said, did the whole spiritual but not religious thing because it sounded lofty. I guess it sounded better, but I've always appreciated philosophies that encouraged, looking within. And so, fast forwarding to when my family and I moved to Atlanta, where religion is extremely prevalent here in the South. Of course, you know
Mhm.
that.
Oh, yeah.
So, and in Atlanta, we were constantly asked, "What church do you go to?" It was, I was not used to that. I wasn't prepared for that at all, and it really made me very uncomfortable. And so, over the years, and as my family grew, we realized that we just did not want our kids heavily exposed to like religious communities. And in the early 2000s, I came across some folks who were questioning religion and speaking on it, as a hindrance to the Black community.
Mm.
And I was inspired by that because I was like, wow, they're actually validating everything I was thinking all this time. And so in finding more folks and finding that there was a Black atheist group, a Black atheist community on Facebook, I was just like, wow, by that time I was really starting to reconsider and reflect my views because I knew that I couldn't stand religion. I always hated that. But when it came to this sense of believing in God, I really had to put that into perspective. So I did that around 2010, and I re-identified as an atheist fully. But in also connecting with fellow atheists, and fellow more Black atheists, I was forewarned about the engagement of the overall secular community because I really wanted to start getting involved and getting out and meeting new people. But there were a few Black atheists who had told me about their experiences with meeting with predominantly white groups. And so I went to my first meetup with an open mind, and sure enough, experienced almost the exact same things
Wow.
that I was warned about. And so with the only other person of color there, we said, we're in Atlanta. Well, I was saying this. I said, we're in Atlanta. It's a very, very chocolate city, if you will. There has to be more folks out here who either don't believe or who are questioning, but they don't think that there's an option. So with that in mind, we started Black Nonbelievers locally to the Atlanta area as an opportunity to meet more folks in person, to start building up that community, and to increase that network. So, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself there, but it was it's it, the re-identification of an atheist. It really helped me overcome that fear that that trepidation that I was feeling, and I just felt so liberated because I'm like, look, I don't feel like I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to pretend to believe even halfway
Mm.
in something that doesn't exist or something that has no basis in evidence. And that has also shown itself to be a problem for our communities, especially the Black community. So with that, I just felt I just came to a renewed sense of liberation, a new renewed sense of peace. And from there, I just really, really wanted to get more involved.
One of the things you said that I find interesting is the the way social media has brought us all together. So, like, as a trans person, I can remember, God, I don't know, the early 2000s, like finding back then it was, message boards.
Uh-huh.
And it was, crossdressers.com because we didn't have other words for it at the time. But like that was my first exposure to the idea that, wow, I'm not just this weird freak in the Midwest who knows no one else like me. My gosh, there's a lot more people out here that are feeling the same way I am. And we would never have found each other had it not been for the internet. Like it's crazy.
Absolutely. Yes. And one thing I've always said over the years is that if one person thinks that they're going through something alone, chances are there's at least five people going through the same
Yes.
thing you are. And even if they aren't close to you in proximity. Like you said, the internet and social media has made it possible for us to connect so much quicker. And I've always been a huge proponent of taking online, connections offline. That it should be just one outlet, and so hopefully that that encourages people to start doing more in person,
Yeah,
and more in person engagement and outreach, because that does make a difference.
for sure. And hopefully somebody will start making some decisions and get COVID under control so that we can all get back out there to the hitting the streets, like getting together stuff.
Yes, yes, I know
I
there's a
sure
lot
miss
of
it.
folks, myself, and we have a lot of space where we are, so that's kind of okay. And then I whenever I go out, I just go to the store and get my essentials and then come back. But yes, I do miss meeting
Hmm.
folks in person. We've had to postpone certain events because of the pandemic, and because unfortunately people's responses to the pandemic and how they aren't complying
Yep.
with the rules. So it's just made it that much more difficult. And so, but yeah, I know people are ready to get back out there,
Yeah.
which is
I get it.
yeah.
But, like, that's
Yes.
if there's one thing that this time has shown me that is, I don't know, in a way concerning that I may not have thought was as big a deal as it truly is, it is the science denialism that we're seeing, the mistrust of industry experts in favor of, the political narrative that fits my preconceived notions. It's just that
Mhm.
idea that so many people in this country are like, no, I'm not wearing a mask, screw you. And not only that, like arguing against the evidence that no, masks aren't effective, and COVID, the flu kills more people than COVID, and like all of this stuff.
Yes.
It's just that lack of the lack of trust in the methods of science, in the experts who use science, that just, I don't know, drives me nuts.
It's also just a lack of care and compassion and humanity,
Yeah.
if you think about it. I mean, it's like, yeah, the mask may be a bit uncomfortable for a little while, and they may seem to be a inconvenience and a nuisance, but guess what? They're necessary.
Yep.
Just wear the damn mask for the time that you need to be out. And my heart goes out to the people who have to work, right
Mhm.
now, and who are working and who are now taking the necessary safety precautions. We get it. I mean, it can be, and you have to be careful with how long you keep them on your face for a particular amount of time. But there's different types of masks.
Mhm.
You shouldn't be wearing them in your vehicle. I mean, my
I love
goodness.
that one.
Right, I'm like,
Uh,
there's this idea that you have to wear them every single place you go, and that isn't true. I'm like, if you're in an enclosed space with people that you have never come into contact before, then wear the mask or make sure you stay the distance. Well, we could say it's common sense, but
yeah, but it's not so common.
unfortunately. Right, yeah. It's not that common. But if people actually, I said this before, if people actually did what they were or what they've been advised to do, then we'd be a whole lot better off. And unfortunately, there's a lot that is coming out of this pandemic that that people have seen, or people's behavior, um, that has been taking place for years,
Yep.
and you realize that there are some people who have to adapt, but there are just some folks who are, they're really exposing themselves for who they really are when they show that they will not remain in compliance.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy. I was talking with someone just the other day about the parallels to the 1918 uh, pandemic, and just that there was again a batch of people who were just there was an anti-masker movement then too. It's like we haven't learned our lesson. So frustrating.
History. I tend to be I'm a bit of a history buff, and it really is a shame how much people don't learn. From historical disasters and crises.
Mhm.
Because yes, this isn't the first pandemic of its kind. This isn't the first thing. This is the first thing that's ever happened. And unfortunately, with human nature, it doesn't seem to be the last. It seems that it won't be the last. And that's just because unfortunately we're dealing with human selfishness. And I just, it's just amazing. It's actually astounding and disappointing to see, just like with folks who are talking about, the racial justice
Mhm.
initiatives. Like, this isn't the first time
Right.
we've been at this rodeo. This isn't the first time, when people are now asking, well, why are we talking about Black Lives Matter? No, we've always been talking about Black Lives Mattering. This is nothing new to anyone, but whether you've been paying attention or whether you
Yes.
actually care is the difference.
Well, let's go back to that darkest timeline then while you're on the topic. I mean, so we've got this pandemic going on, and then you layer on top of that, I think we are still as a nation reeling from the murder of George Floyd and the I mean the civil unrest that's come out of that, and action and then you see this stuff that's going on out on the West Coast, and it just it's just so much all at once. My concern is that, that will cool down like it usually does without having made much progress. But I don't know.
Mhm.
What do you think? Does this seem like just another moment like that, or is there something different in a measurable way this time?
I've seen there are measurable differences this time. There seems that there are people who genuinely want to know what they can do
Yeah.
in this, in this very, very troubling time. What I'm hoping doesn't happen, because unfortunately in movements, um, and I kind of take a varied view on this, because I see so much behind the scenes. And I'm hoping that people actually take this time, or more of this moment, to show their humanity and engage with people better, so that we can keep this going. Often, what happens is that the cause becomes so overarching that people forget about how to treat each other, and then it falls to the wayside. And I think that is what has happened historically. With the Black Panther movement, for example, I mean, the cause was definitely revolutionary. They fed kids in the neighborhood, but they treated women horribly. And then, of course, with the FBI's interference and actually killing off, their high profile leaders, and it just really revealed, how the lack of treatment of people. And so we've seen this happen time and time again. And so, what I'm hoping is that there are more people, instead of just rallying for things publicly, you also adjust and change how you treat people privately and how you engage privately, so that so that these movements can continue. Because oftentimes, you have egos that get in the way. You have folks who, once they get to a certain status, they just things start changing. And and we've seen this happen in the secular community too.
Mhm.
So hopefully, just the basic treatment of human beings, and actually putting your money where your mouth is, will make it. And this is the time to do that.
Yeah.
We've seen more people do it, and it must remain consistent in order for this to stay at the front of people's minds, because there's definitely some changes that need to be made.
I love what the part you brought up about, you know, the public display is great, but you have to change the private too. Like we think a lot of times of like talking about the GSRM community. You know, if you're not a queer person and somebody at the office makes a gay joke, tell them that's not okay. Like, speak
Right.
up on our behalf when those things are happening and we're not around to defend ourselves. So it's that, you know, that private stuff too of correcting behaviors when they're not appropriate. And I certainly see them in my everyday life, and I'm constantly calling out what I can. Um I think too, like, well, let me tell you a little bit about sort of people have heard this story. This is my where I come from story. But so I grew up in lily white Midwest America. It was a town of 1,400 people, high school graduating class of 32. There were no people of color. Everyone spoke English. It was like corn, soybeans, and white people as far as you could see, right? And somewhere along the way, though I don't recall how or when, maybe it wasn't overt, but like I was taught to fear black people. It's black men specifically.
Mhm.
Um, Whenever we'd go like to the nearest city, right? My parents would lock the car doors whenever we'd turn down Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, right? Because that was the neighborhood. Um, Hell, just the other day, my dad shared this meme. Oh my god. So it's a picture of a Confederate flag on the top that says, "I'm not. This does not offend me," and on the bottom, a photo of two young men of color from the waist down with their pants sagged below their butt,
Mm.
and the text, "This bullshit does." I just
Huh.
this is a generational thing. It's a geographical thing. Like, it's my dad. It just drives me bonkers, and I'm constantly calling him out for this kind of stuff too. Um, but when I think about like my own experiences, I think had had I stayed in that small hick town, I I don't know where I would be now. I don't know that I would ever have been able to come out as trans and live authentically. um, uh, 12, 13 years ago. I don't remember how long it's been now. I moved down here and I'm in the Orlando Disney bubble, you know, where like
Mhm.
diversity reigns supreme around here. And I got to know people who were different and learn about their experiences. And like that just really changed my thinking in big ways. And then the other is like when I started dealing with my gender identity issues and connecting with my own community there, that really helped me sort of relate to, in some ways, to the experiences of other marginalized groups because so
Mhm.
much of those are there are a lot of parallels and mirroring going on there. But yeah, when I think about home, I just think like so many people that I grew up with did never left, never will, and they're raising their kids there like they were raised there by the generational farms that just it goes on and on and on. So I don't know how much of that is design or taken advantage of, but it's, that maintenance of the status quo. And I don't know. I guess there's no question in there, but more of an observation. But I don't know if you want to speak to any of that.
So, yes, even though I was raised in New York City, there are a lot of I realize that even in my neighborhood, there are a lot of people with small town mentalities, that they will never leave either the borough of Queens where I'm from, or they may never leave the city of New York to even go to other parts of the state, or travel anywhere else. And part of that I think is part of that is due to the structural and institutionalized racism that has affected so many people. The one thing I say is that white supremacy has hurt everybody.
Mhm,
It has hurt, because when you tell your story of being in your small town and how you were taught to fear black folks, especially black men, it really, really does. It jades folks. It jades a lot of people into thinking that they're actually better than their
mhm.
black counterparts. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of white folks who I think are voting against their best interests, especially with this current administration.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting to see how that type of that type of fear and ignorance does breed itself in this American society. And much of it is really subliminal. People don't even realize that they're doing it. And they've, because it's just been fed to them, after through generation, people think it's normalized. And it does take for us to venture out of our environments to realize that, hey, there is something different here. And then with the prevalence of religion in this country, on top of that, it makes it so much worse. And the like the propaganda even within these United States, about other races and other ethnicities and other backgrounds. I mean, it can be it is just a hotbed of ignorance. And
Yeah.
I applaud anyone and everyone who thinks beyond that, because even though I wasn't raised religious, I certainly was indoctrinated. I was indoctrinated into thinking that I had to mistrust every single white person. And granted, there is a institutional factor that needs to be understood about that.
Hmm.
Instead of white folks just getting defensive, you need to understand the atrocities that have been committed against the black community, and now even more so against the black trans community
Oh,
by
yes.
other black folks too. So, and we know we don't escape accountability. We're not exempt from that, but it's like, well, we can't just turn this around by ourselves either. We didn't get ourselves into it.
Right.
It shouldn't just be up to us to get ourselves out of it either. And so it is just amazing how, and it really is to see how many in many communities, whether you're in a big city or a small town, tend to carry the same mentalities. And and it shows that we really aren't much different from each other than
Right.
people think. We
Yes.
really aren't.
Yeah.
But there, even with these societal and socio factors that come into play here, we really aren't much different. And I do think that finding common ground would help us a whole lot more.
I think that speaks a lot to humanism, you know?
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's the if there is a quote unquote doctrine of we are far more alike than we are different, it's those values of humanism. But you're touching on there too a little bit about the divisiveness of religion in general. So I want to sort of start down that road. These are some statistics from Pew Research, and I pulled this out of the 2014 Religious Landscape Study. I'll quote: Blacks are also less likely than the U.S. public as a whole to identify as religiously unaffiliated, that is, atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. While 23% of the public identifies as unaffiliated, the share among blacks is 18%. This number, however, has risen among blacks and among the overall public. The share of African Americans who identify as religious nuns grew by 6 percentage points between the 2007 and 2014 surveys, from 12% to 18%, similar to the increase among those in the general population. I would imagine that since 2014, that 18% is probably increased again, as it has overall. We've seen,
Mhm.
and we've talked about this sort of before, but from a person on the outside, I think it's just such a fascinating window into the world, and I want to get your take on what seems like the almost inseparable and indistinguishable identity of Black American and Christian, and how that affects folks who leave the faith or who weren't raised in one, trying to navigate in this highly Christian centered culture.
Oh boy, we could probably
That's
be
a
here for
lot.
another hour to talking about that, but I'll try to sum it up in a nutshell
Okay.
because that's that's
It's a
pretty
big
much the
one.
crux of what I speak on.
Yes.
So here it is: we have to take into account the institutional factors. For one, that again, going back to being enslaved in the Western Hemisphere, especially in the United States and the Caribbean, where Christianity was, first of all, the Pope sanctioned the transatlantic slave trade with the human trafficking and brutalization of Africans and also the indigenous
Hmm.
populations. So with those Christian doctrines being infused basically into law and being imposed on the enslaved, and then basically erecting the churches. And also there were some enslaved Africans that were allowed to keep some of their traditional their traditional beliefs, or their former beliefs, and so it kind of morphed into the Christianity, and some sects of Christianity that you see within the Black community. And also because the church became this institution that was a support system for Blacks, especially once slavery and Reconstruction ended and Jim Crow laws
Hmm.
were enacted. There were a lot of people within the Black community that turned to their faith, and also the churches for a huge percentage of the community base. And so it does account for the higher numbers amongst Black folks in this country, because we still only make up about 12% of the population, but the numbers of the religiously identified are still very high.
Hmm.
Um, the challenge becomes when it seems to become such an identifier within the Black community that if you're Black, it's automatically assumed that you're a Christian,
Right.
and from the Black communities and white communities as well. And also there is this overlording of the community of the Black of the church being such a presence during the civil rights movement and other resistance movements, as if they've had the monopoly on it. So what it does, unfortunately, is it misrepresents historical factors and the fact that there were Black folks who have always rejected religion,
Hmm.
and who critiqued the institution of the church. So it kind of makes you othered. It's like we're othered within our own community.
Yeah.
If you aren't seen, if you aren't that traditional church going, and following what it means to be Black, or be a part of the Black experience. And so this has I contend that it has been harmful, to our communities, that we don't recognize the level of diversity within our own community that has always been there, and for the fact that there are a lot of people who are unaware of the achievements within the Black community, that were actually a result of those Black folks who actually critique the institution of religion.
Hmm.
So, and this has permeated itself even amongst some other communities of color and other white folks too. So, it really, really has done a number on the psyche of people and also the perception of the Black community. And while the numbers of the religiously unaffiliated are now rising, there's still a lot of spirituality within the Black community. We're seeing now that more Black millennials and younger generations are doing away with those traditional beliefs,
Yep.
because they really are tired of the whole fire and brimstone thing, the whole go to hell. If you don't believe, you're going to go to hell. And much of it is due, some people may not identify, due to the pressures of the community, not just to be religious, but because it is so tied into the identity of being Black,
Mm.
that it becomes that much more challenging to even talk about it. And because many folks are still heavily surrounded by our peers and family members and friends who are religious,
Yeah.
it just makes it that it really creates this mentality that you are alone and that you are, that you are isolated, which isn't true, but that's mentally hard to overcome.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's maybe a sort of well-meaning white folk, and I was certainly in this place before. But I think like there are people that are struggling to understand. There's just this instinct to just scream, but you're worshiping the god of slavery. Yeah,
Right.
you know,
Right.
knowing all of that history, we know all of that history. We know, and I think a lot of people think about this in terms of, Latin American islanders too. Like colonists are the Borg, right? Resistance is futile. You will adapt to service us, and here's our religion. Guess what you believe now? You didn't. We didn't come with that. So I think there's just a struggle, this narrative that, we understand that religion has been forced upon many people's ancestors, a religion deeply rooted in white supremacy and oppression.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people just have a genuine struggle to understand why, knowing all of this, that there is still such this strong attachment to Christianity.
Yes, and I think that it's, we acknowledge the fact that there are communities who kind of taken it and made it their own, right?
Hmm.
There are folks who will take passages from the Bible and utilize it to be more uplifting to the Black community, even though I contend that it's all harmful.
Hmm.
um but at least, trying to understand, because it's harmful for everybody. But I would say, especially for, for those in the Black community who, even if, let's say, you put a black, you paint Jesus as being black, which according to the Bible, he was not this blonde haired or blue eyed individual.
Say it ain't
That,
so.
yeah, yeah, he is, definitely is not that. But asking the question of, if this, if we are painting this picture of a God who looks more like us, and you're actually trying to say that, he's been helpful through, or he or she or it has been helpful through all of our times of
Mm,
struggle, then one needs to ask, where the hell was he, she, or it when you were, what type of, what, what point were they trying to prove?
yeah.
And so, the conditioning of suffering, which goes through generation, and
Mhm.
which is reinforced by these supremacist ideals, and actually physically or legally holding people back. Again, it does a number on the psyche of the individuals. And so, presented with, this information can be very jarring, and you have to be very careful, because everyone may not receive it in the same way. There are some folks who will probably never receive it
Yeah.
because they're so conditioned to, to believing, these things, even though, and we can say this about other, the white folks who in the community who now, who realize that, times are changing, and change is coming. You're not existing in this lily white world that you
Yes.
may be used to anymore. And there are a lot of people who are fighting against that. We're
Mhm.
seeing that now. So it's interesting to see, and I've had that question for many in the Black community. I'm like, do you realize that this was the religion that was forced on us, that was forced on our ancestors, that was used to, to subjugate and oppress and kill us? And there were Black folks who resisted that. So it is frustrating to see that so many hold on to it very tightly, and it doesn't matter how much you make it your own. The doctrine hasn't changed. You can even hear it in some of the in the gospel music. You hear it in a
Mhm.
lot of the language that a lot of Christians, and a lot of Black Christians speak. It's like, oh my gosh, it is still one that, that encourages submission and subjugation, and it's like, oh my gosh, it is maddening. but trying to get people to see that,
Mhm.
and I think this is why it's important for us to make our presence known the way we do, because people need to see that, okay, this, the narrative that you've been brought up with is skewed. you know what you may have been taught to think before isn't necessarily the case, and you, just as in other areas you encourage people to educate themselves, the same must be the case when reviewing your own beliefs.
For sure. Well, and you talk about groups that have taken it as their well. First, let me say, in the same way that obviously we need to normalize atheism broadly, that's true of all the subgroups that come along with it too, right?
Right.
So, and maybe more so in those more marginalized communities and subgroups. But on the idea of groups that have sort of taken this Christianity and made it their own, Frederick Douglass had this to say: between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference, so wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be the friend of the one is of necessity to be the enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, woman-worshipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. End quote. And I guess you can boil that down to that, popular saying, it's not your Christ I have a problem with, it's your Christians. Um,
Right.
though I think you and I would both disagree with Douglas's view on the goodness of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we would, because didn't Jesus say that he came to fulfill, his dad's I guess wishes.
Hmm.
He wasn't necessarily going to end slavery, he wasn't
I didn't come to
necessarily
bring
coming.
peace, I came to bring division.
Right, absolutely. And so yes, the
Yeah.
goodness of Jesus is definitely questionable. And if outright undeniable that he wasn't this good being after all, because I have spoken to many atheists who in looking at the book of Revelation and how apocalyptic it is, how
Mhm.
ultimately, if you don't believe in this good and kind Jesus, that ultimately you are condemned to hell, and you are condemned to just this torturous afterlife, and which puts a lot of fear into people. So yes, it is definitely I can recognize that Frederick Douglass, especially in his 1852 oration, where he actually mentioned embrace the atheists, those who don't believe in God at all, as opposed to as opposed to just the pro-slavery Christianity.
Mhm.
But it's always ironic to us, and we have and that's a good thing about being in this day and age, that we can openly and better speak to the paradox of you know taking one aspect of Christianity, which is supposedly good, and and comparing it to that is inherently bad, and realizing that it's all bad. It is pretty much all bad there. But I have to respect where he was, even
Mhm.
in that disagreement.
Sure. Well, let's turn our focus to action then. And while it's slowly getting better, maybe like the broader world, the atheist movement still has a diversity problem. I would love to hear that experience that you mentioned at the top about going to that very first set of events, or the very first event, and the things that you were warned about, and what that experience was like. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. So um I remember one of my cohorts in particular who said that at the conferences, there's a tendency for white people to be overly friendly, or overly dismissive of the people of color there. There's also a tendency, one of the first thing I heard was I never met a black atheist before. So we were treated like I was treated like a novelty.
Uh-huh.
And this idea that, well, that, I mean, and yes, I'm pretty sure, even though we are still in, there's still a lot more black folks who still believe, so it makes it that much more difficult to, find others. But um there was this tendency for a lot of white folks to think that we spoke for the entire black community, that this was their opportunity to, to question us on things that they may not have been comfortable asking other people of color before, and also with those stereotypes included.
Yep.
And so there was a tendency to stigmatize us, or to try to make us their, the tokens, hey, now we have this, these black folks here, these, these people of color, but yet your content and the way you do things is still rooted in whiteness,
Mhm.
that it's still, it isn't indicative or representative of the people of color that you're trying to attract. So that's often what we experience, and what prohibits certain people of color from coming back, because it isn't really as welcoming or as inclusive as many people think that what many would like to believe. And while there's a lot of good information, being being dispensed in these spaces, how you do it, how you're engaging, and also how you're checking your members who need some work in their social skills
Mhm.
will make a difference, because our community prides itself on being so intellectual and so smart that they don't realize when they're actually being offensive and
Yeah,
inconsiderate to others. And that also very much contributes to, to the lack of diversity and being inclusive. And so when I realized this, and also when we spoke on the challenges of being a black atheist, it was dismissed as, well, I'm white and I go through this too, so it isn't much different. And it's like, oh boy, yeah, so you're just not getting the point at all.
Mhm.
And so yeah, when it becomes a combative, situation where, people are not going to understand or even try to understand what you go through, then folk then you realize that your groups are going to stay one way, whether it is all white or whether it is a certain demographic, whether they're older,
Yep.
whether there's more men or such. So, these are things that, the organizations, and a lot have been thinking about it, a lot have been making some changes, or they've been taking, the recommendations seriously, but there's still some work to go. There's still a long way to go there.
For sure. I mean, and I think if we're not having these conversations like this, like nothing's going to change. And I don't want my atheist community to be an old white guys club. Like that is far and away a lot of the atheist community broadly, and especially when you start thinking about like the egos that show up on the news every time someone's talking about atheism, right?
Hmm.
It's real old white dude club. Um, so so I guess that that's the rub. That's the question for folks trying to understand whether it's these local communities and organizers, or when we're putting together conventions or whatever it is, looking for those ways to better support a more diverse audience or membership or cast of folks. Um, Here's maybe a more fun question.
Hmm.
Um, what do you want white folks to just shut the hell up about? Like, like I'm sure I've said some dumb shit already today that I need to stop, right? But like, so let me have it, Mandisa. Don't hold back. What are we doing? What are we doing that's not helpful or maybe even harmful? Like, hit us with some specifics that we need to be watching out for.
Okay, so I will just say this as tactfully as possible because I do like to be. Stop centering yourself when it comes to issues pertaining to people of color. This is not the opportunity for you to say that as a white person, this is what I go through.
Mhm.
I mean, you can be empathetic without always inserting yourself into the conversation or into the discussion. And when there are spaces where whether it's black folks or people of color that are speaking, you make sure you're listening. You make sure that, and also, I would like for y'all to stop asking, is it okay that if I'm white that I participate or that I support? Because that should be a no-brainer. That there may be some black spaces who don't want certain white participation. And guess what? um that is totally valid. But if you see a black space, or if you see an organization that is run by black folks, you make sure you play your part and you support and you listen and you take in the information and you reflect on it to make sure that you are engaging better. This is not your opportunity to just center yourself or to make people feel sorry for you, because you consider yourself an ally, and you probably are, right? There is a way for you to support without trying to make those who are more marginalized and oppressed feel sorry for you.
I think from my part, it's that when we get corrected, we need to not fly off the handle.
Right,
Like
yes.
I need to be told, hey, the way you just handled that situation, here's a better way, or here's
Yeah.
here's how that affects me, or like, and I need to be willing to receive that. It's like any kind of feedback that you're given about something that you're doing, but there's so much baked into white people flying off the handle when someone corrects them on something. And I I think if that for me, that's the one thing I try to keep in mind when you say stop doing this. It's that listening piece. I'm really trying to turn that around. But I know I want to believe that most people are well-meaning, I guess, is what I'm
Mhm.
trying to say,
Right. And it
you
doesn't
know?
it doesn't invalidate anyone's, experiences. It doesn't invalidate
Yes.
that yes, there are a lot, and I'll say this for the number of black folks who how we do need to be accountable for making sure that we aren't burning bridges with those who truly are helping, those who do get it.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that no matter especially for those of us who are coming from marginalized demographics, that we aren't internally fighting so much that we are dismissing those who truly do want to who are on our side. um but yes, but understanding that, again, because whiteness is still the majority.
Yeah.
It is still, whether people realize it or not, it is still seen as the go-to, and it has manifested itself in many different ways. People need to recognize how that plays a part in how we engage each other, and understanding that there are things that we can do about that. There are
Yes.
things that white folks can do in uplifting and continuing to be consistent about uplifting the voices of black folks, other people of color, and other marginalized communities. And it doesn't mean that anything is being taken away from you. It doesn't mean that somehow you're being diminished personally, because again, white supremacy and the institution of and the the institutions of racism and oppression have affected all of us, and it's going to take a concerted effort on many of our parts to make sure that this changes.
Yes. I want to touch back on one thing that you just kind of touched on briefly. And that's, and that I'm sure this is something that you are extremely tired of hearing. So I wanna stop and draw a circle around it again, because I think we shot past it kind of quick. That idea of, why does there have to be a black non-believers? Why
Oh,
can't you
yeah.
just be part of the other atheist organizations? Um, and I mean, I feel like that's obvious, but I know that you get that question probably daily now. Still, almost 10 years. You're going to be black non-believers 10 years next year, which is super
Correct.
exciting. But you're still, I'm sure, getting that same damn question.
Absolutely, or not even just question, we just get outright
Just told.
vitriol
Ugh.
from from people who want to know, why does there need to be a need for black non-believers? Why are we talking about these issues of racism and such? So yes. Yeah, we definitely get that. And like we talked about before, the numbers in the black community of religious folks that make it that much harder for black atheists to be visible and to openly identify. That's the number one reason.
Yep.
That is the number one reason for black non-believers. Because we are a part of the black community, we represent the black experience, and people need to know that. And also, those folks who are questioning and those folks who have felt isolated need to know that there are people out there who directly understand and who can directly help support, because there is going to be this lens that comes from the overall secular community, while supportive, may not specifically understand what it means to be a black person and to be atheist, especially with all of these other factors, all of these other institutional factors. So therefore, that is the main reason why black non-believers exist. If you feel some sort of way because you feel like, well, we're separating ourselves, if you don't get it after if you have never looked at our website, if you've never looked up any of our information, if you're just going on your personal bias, first of all, you're revealing yourself. You're revealing how little you know. You're revealing how little you're willing to understand and listen and communicate. But if that is what it's taking for if that is what you're going to take from it, then shame on you.
I think, I do want to share, there is what do we call them, affiliates, chapters.
Affiliates. Uh-huh.
There is an Orlando affiliate of Black Nonbelievers. So if
Mhm.
anyone out there is listening and interested, that is a thing. But now I will say, we kind of talked to this off the air. That's an hour away from where we are, and the Orlando groups being so far away was sort of a driver for creating our group. I'll admit our group isn't as diverse as I would have expected it to be or would like it to be. But I think about, like, the reality that you've described of what it is like to be black in America and not identify with the majority religious belief and identity. I think here, in a largely rural county, would probably be even harder for someone than someone in, say, Orlando in the city. And I want to make sure that, when we're thinking about community building, that we are building places that are welcoming for all stripes of non-believers. So I don't know, hypothetically, maybe a selfish sort of question. What do you suggest for groups to do, for organizers to be thinking about? There's like creating, again, being a trans person, I'd like to think I have a different sort of filter on my view of inclusivity and diversity. But then I think about things like just reaching people, right? Like just getting the word out there that, like, hey, there's a thing, and we may not understand you completely, but if you fall into this kind of general thing, like, come hang out with us. We want you. We want you to be leaders. We want, like, this is a big tent. When we created our organization, that was the intention from the beginning, was to be a very big tent sort of organization. So, but then I think, like, just that outreach of how to get the word out to people. And it's like, it's not quite as easy as throw a thing in the newspaper or Craigslist or whatever that people did 15, 20 years ago to say, hey, let's go meet up at the pub for a drink. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, so I am a huge advocate of going past your comfort zone. And that's what a lot of, and I've spoken on this extensively, that even though, something may be an hour away, and something may be a considerable distance, if, there may be times where you may have to, not just suck it up, but be more courageous and engage those spaces. And I will say that we are looking for new organizers for our affiliates and for people to actually remain committed to it. Now, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to do something every week like in your religious communities, but at least doing something once a month, whether it is virtual or in person. And also, it may be good to take it outside of maybe the city limits just a little bit.
Mhm.
People are going to have to broaden the scope and broaden their horizons a bit, and actually meet certain people where they are. Um, get involved and participate in events where you may not necessarily think you might be welcome, but you gotta give it a shot. You gotta give it a try, because that's the only way you'll know. Even if it doesn't work out fine, you try it again, and try to think of the different things that you can do in order to reach people. And so and my thing is always making sure it takes just, well, now for me it may seem simple, but for others it may be more difficult, especially in a community, like I said, where many are socially awkward,
Mhm.
if not just socially inept,
Yep.
which is something that people should be responsible for. But yeah, getting out of that comfort zone and understanding that it is possible for you to reach out to people. It takes a certain energy to do it, but the more you do it, the better you get.
I would say, like, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, Sarah, where can I go? What is there? What are some advice that you have?" I would point them to the Orlando Black Nonbelievers
Mhm. Yeah.
as the nearest affiliate. But also, I would say, again, being here like an hour, hour and a half away, I would say, go see how it's done. Go see
Mhm.
what the opportunities are. And then, if it's something that you're interested in, start your own, because I'm telling you, just like everybody else, we have all thought or said out loud, I'm the only one. I'm the only one here. I'm the
Right,
only one. There's
right.
nobody else here that's an atheist or whatever. Like, and that's bullshit. There are more than just you. I promise you. And there's a lot of support out there to help you get started in creating these local groups and to get
Right.
people in.
And who says you have to belong to just one?
Yeah.
There are a number of organizations that you can become a part of, because they may do different things. There are some organizations that are more politically active.
Mhm.
They are more into the protesting and the, those type of direct actions. You may have some that are more community based, as far as the more openly charitable events, or the more charitable initiatives, as far as feeding the homeless and such. And there are some who are more socially engaging, and we're still trying to build up that community. There is no one right way to do this.
Yeah.
So, and that goes back to expanding your scope, broadening your horizons on the things that you can do. Now, of course, I don't encourage people to burn themselves out and do everything or every single thing, because that can hurt you as well. But, trying to, at least engage with two, at least two groups that you in your area, or that might be a little further out, would be very, very helpful.
I love it. Okay, final question before we plug all the things. And this is, I think, maybe one of my favorite questions to ask people. What's one thing that people never ask you about that you wish they would?
Oh gosh.
What do you like to talk about that just doesn't come up in conversation?
That's actually kind of hard
Uh-huh.
to answer right now. Well, the one thing I would say is, how can I give you $100,000, maybe?
Oh,
But
oh, yeah. You can go to Black
or
Nonbelievers,
right, yes.
fill out
Not
the
what
form.
can I do to help? How can I give you this amount of money? um, But, I mean, I think we run the gamut of
Yeah.
a lot of the questions, or a lot of the conversations that, that we get. And, it's been great to, and I do appreciate those who ask, like, "How are you doing?"
Yeah, there you
You know,
go.
"How are you doing all of this?" Because, at the time that we started Black Nonbelievers, and that it became a national organization, I was working a full-time job.
Mhm.
My kids were much younger at the time. My husband has he has a terminal condition.
Mm.
So there was a lot that I was already handling, even in addition to this. But I think, also, I think what motivates me is a question that I think more people could probably ask. What is my motivating
Mm.
factor? And much of that was because of what it did for me, and what it did for my liberation, and only imagining what it is like for other people. I mean, I get a lot of correspondence from folks who are in that space. They still feel trapped. They still feel alone, as if no one gets it. And knowing that we're here for them, it just makes me it helps me to it reaffirms why we do this. And I'm sure, even for you, with representing the trans community,
For
and
sure.
us being a huge proponents of the LGBTQ community. These things matter. Our existence matters, their existence matters. And sometimes just being there for them, it reaffirms us.
See, you thought that was a hard question. You knocked it out of the park.
Right. Thank you.
That's one of my favorite questions to ask because people always do that. Oh, wait a minute. I haven't never thought about that before. Well, you've been so gracious with your time, and I appreciate it very much. And of course, as always, I could just keep going and talk and talk and talk for hours. But let's put a pin in it there now and make plans to do this again. We'll save some stuff to talk about for next time.
Absolutely.
What do you have going on? I know there's another panel event coming up with Dr. Sakivu Hutchinson that you're doing.
Correct. That is coming up on Thursday. It is unapologetically feminist, heretical, and reasonable in the workplace. I hope I got that correctly. I hope I got that correct. And we're also putting together an event for our general meeting next month, with the Association of Black Humanists, which is based out of London. And we're preparing for our 10th anniversary. We had to postpone Women of Color Beyond Belief for 2020 until 2021, and I highly recommend that people watch the videos on our YouTube channel, because they were some amazing presentations. We just completed the Black Family Discussion that is available on our YouTube page as well, our YouTube channel, and also our Facebook page. So we just have, we have other event. I'm also speaking with Dr. Anthony Penn, um, about with the Humanists and Freethinkers of Fairfield County out of Connecticut. next month. And so, the events and appearances, they just come. They definitely are coming up, and as they do, we definitely share them. But yes, I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation on Thursday with Dr. Hutchinson and also my sister Bridget Crutchfield. We are the co-producers of the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference, and it was just an amazing event to put together.
Awesome. And of course, if folks want to get to Black Nonbelievers and learn more about the organization and the work that you're doing, that's blacknonbelievers.com.
Yes, we are .org. It does, revert to .com. So yeah, that's
Either way, I'll
yeah,
get you there.
whichever, yeah, either way, yeah, yeah, you get there to us. And we're also pretty much everywhere on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter at B Nonbelievers, the B and the N are capitalized. We're on Instagram at B Nonbelievers Inc. Our YouTube channel is Black Nonbelievers Inc. So yes, you can find us everywhere on social media.
Awesome. Well, Mandisa, again, thank you so much for all that you're doing in the movement and for the gift of your time today. And I'm looking forward to another conversation with you in the future and working together a little more closely going forward. I hope that's something that we can put on the whiteboard.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. You have a good one. We'll be in touch.
You too.
All right. Mandisa Thomas, founder and current president of Black Nonbelievers. What a great conversation. A couple of quick announcements before we go. I want to let you know that Thursday night, after you watch Mandisa in conversation on unapologetically Black, feminist, and heretical in the workplace, that was pretty close. You can click back over here to the atheist community of Polk County. I will be talking to Monica Miller, legal director and senior counsel with the American Humanist Association. She'll join me. That's Thursday, July 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern on Freethought in Florida. Freethought in Florida is now available in podcast form in addition to this YouTube and Facebook video. Search for the show in your favorite app and find subscribe links at our website. And you can now become a patron at patreon.com/polkatheists, which is another great way to support the atheist community of Polk County and the ongoing production of the show. And as always, you can find out all about the ACPC or make a donation at polkatheists.org and at Polk Atheists on all the social media. Of course, remember the three most important things. Don't touch anything, wash your hands, and wear your mask. Everybody be safe, and we'll see you Thursday on the next Freethought in Florida.